Okay, so that was Amanda DeBoer Barlett interpreting Tomás Gueglio Triste y Madrigal from 2021, right?
Yeah, with Ensemble Damiente. I believe, yeah, so our guest today is Amanda. We're really happy to have her. She's a brilliant singer who has a wide range of things she does, and also a songwriter. She, besides Nelson Damiente, she also is a founding member of Quince and Hasco Duo. We kind of crossed paths briefly a lot of different times. I attended her festival, Omaha Under the Radar, right before COVID started. And then she founded that in her hometown. She studied her undergraduate in Chicago at DePaul, and then went to University of Buffalo. I think we just missed each other. And then she received her DMA at Bowling Green State University, and then eventually we kind of both made our way back to Chicago. But yeah, we're really happy to have her. Is there anything else you want to say about yourself? So
That's a great intro. You got it all.
Really complete bio, definitely.
No, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Actually. Oh. So, how was it working on this piece, like with a living composer? Do you mostly work? What do you focus on contemporary music or standard repertoire?
Mostly I work with living composers. I've been commissioning music since I was an undergrad, kind of asking my friends to write me music, and really got interested in it very early. I did study opera at DePaul, but as soon as I met Tony Arnold, I knew I wanted to study with her at Buffalo, so I kind of followed her over there. And then I was fully in contemporary music. So most of what I do is working with living composers. And then I also write folk and country songs.
Oh, that's kind of like an interesting, that's an overused word, but that's a very eclectic, let's say, very opposed type of genres that you work with then. Like,
I think it's because I grew up in Omaha, and I grew up listening to country music. And so that's just a big part of how I came to music as a kid. And eventually I found my way back to it, but I still love working with other composers. So I just kind of do both things and don't try to make them fit together.
Well, I think like my husband, he's very into country music and listen to a lot. I do think the link I kind of see between country music and contemporary music is I think they're both much more open timbrally than other like more mainstream, I guess, genres of music. There's more, I think, a bigger gamut of colors that you typically
That's super
hear.
perceptive. I think you're totally right. And especially with older country music and folk music, it does, to me, feel like chamber music. And really, when I work with living composers, mostly I'm doing chamber music. I like one per part, intricate things where everyone's part is essential. I don't want to record music where there's 80 layers of pads and filler. That's not what I do. So in everything that I do, I really like that chamber music feel and that timbral exploration. That's really perceptive, Megan. Thank you for framing it that way.
working with colors then is like you are it will seem then that you are attracted to certain soundscapes or temporally interesting, temporally active, temporally contrasting soundscapes, let's say. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that I love Tomas's music he has a beautiful way of working with that Klangfarben feeling where he's passing these tones around the ensemble and exploring that color relationship. I like that his music feels light and airy. And so you hear this sound kind of floating around you. That's how I feel when I'm singing it. And with country and folk music, I like that really bright, twangy, like reinforced overtone feeling where you're really focused on tuning the overtones to each other, and that brings this cutting clarity to the sound. Yeah, it's really fun to sink into a color world, and for me, music is such a vehicle for emotion and expression, and I think a lot of that comes from the timbre itself.
Timbre as emotion. I'm gonna quote you on that. That's
Take it, steal it, it's yours. Yeah. Yeah.
it's like a focus of. I would guess that everyone here has focus on timbre at some point or another. But yeah, I got
Yeah.
that feeling from this piece that it was kind of like exploring timbres on a microscopic level, kind of like in a very nuanced detail, going instrument through instrument, nothing big, just very. It felt like a very intimate piece too. But now, how you describe it as floating, kind of like the sounds going from space to space. Do you think that he had space in mind when he was writing it? I think that Shunting can talk a bit about this since you also met Thomas in the composers conference. You said,
Yeah, but I believe in, if I don't misremember, he composed like a big ensemble piece for the conference, and which also had like like kind of like seating arrangement, some kind of like spatial like arrangement for the ensemble. I forgot how many instruments he composed for, probably like 10 or like 12, something like that. Because he and Chris Godot, another guest that we represented like maybe 2 months ago, both of them actually composed like big ensemble pieces for that occasion. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that something that I experience with Tomas's work is that it's really based in memory, and it feels like your subconscious kind of floating to the surface in a semi organized but still kind of surreal way, where it fits together but not perfectly linearly. And so it feels like a composite puzzle of different colors. And so much of his piece is based in memory, and and memory is such a faulty thing, we kind of create it as we go. And so that's what I experience with his music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think in terms of like timbres, like I think I've seen you perform a lot of times in such a wide range, like contemporary music. And sometimes you're singing in a way that's very just conventional singing, and sometimes more along this line. I've seen you be like a lot more theatrical or have even extended vocal techniques as well. Is there any kind of music do you particularly like to perform or don't like to perform, or do you like just to kind of keep it that wide?
I love having a wide variety. I think that pieces that I'm drawn to tend to be, for better or worse, really trying to communicate a story or an emotion. So that's just what I'm drawn to. I love storytelling, and I come from a line of storytellers, and it doesn't need to be poetry and text. I feel like there's so many ways to communicate a story sonically. So I do like the feeling that there's a trajectory and a beginning, middle, end. So in anything that I'm doing, whether it's folk music, I performed a Wang Lu piece in the fall called Pecking Order, which was kind of a surreal exploration of power. That was super fun. So I do I am a sucker for a good story. And that's something that I find universal about what I enjoy performing.
Yeah.
so narratively speaking, then would you see, do you appreciate when the music kind of tells its own narrative in an instrumental way, kind of goes developing in a certain manner, uh, probably alongside the story that it's trying to tell, or sometimes independent of that?
I think that sometimes with the with instrumental music or like vocal music without text, it can be really interesting when it feels like there's a relationship between the instruments that develops, between the different players in the chamber ensemble. It's why I like chamber music. It feels like there's a relationship that develops, and maybe it's contrary, maybe they get along together, and that's maybe it's a very simple way that my mind works, that I'm trying to overlay a narrative on things that maybe don't necessarily need it, because we can just really exist within this timbral space and be satisfied. But for me, if it feels like I get to have a relationship with the other instruments that develops throughout the piece and it changes, that can be really satisfying, even without text and poetry.
Yeah, that can be sometimes hard to achieve, because a lot of times, just the fact that singers often have text, a lot of times that kind of elevates them to like soloists with like background, rather than being like part of the ensemble.
Yeah, and that can be such a bummer, because it feels like then I'm separate. I want to be in the club with everyone. I don't necessarily want to be this separate other thing. That can be fun too, of course. I mean, that's great. But that's why I love Georges Apergis, because like his La Nuit en Tête, it uses text, but in a surreal way. And it's very embedded within the framework of the instruments. And everyone, I feel like, has their moment to pop out of the texture and then come back in. And then after the instrument, I feel, has popped out of the texture and had its soloistic moment, then when it's back in the context of the ensemble, you hear it differently. So that's really, really nice. And so it uses text, but the text can be kind of surreal, and the story develops from the relationship between and among the instruments.
Yeah.
As a composer, it's kind of, it takes a lot of a very good eye, a very good ear, let's say, to be able to do that simultaneously. Have you encountered that often with the people you work with the composers you work with? Text development, the story development, as well as on par with the music. It's kind of like,
it is hard to do, and I think one of the difficulties is that what I see often is that a composer is trying to write 4 or 5 pieces in one piece. You know what I mean? Yes. Where there's too many ideas in the piece, so no single idea gets fully developed. And I think these relationships and this thing that we're talking about, whether it's text development, music development, it just requires a little bit of time and space. And that's, I think, what Thomas did well in that piece, and does well, is that he gives each timbre and sonic element enough time and space to exist without cramming too much in. And our brains are so simple. We want something to focus on. So I think that that's something that it is really hard to do, because people are doing too many things in their pieces sometimes for any one thing to really shine and be the focus.
Yeah.
I think, Megan, you do that well in your music. You seem to have your pieces kind of fixate on a gesture.
Yeah.
And then you look at it from every single angle, and then you bring it home at the end back somehow, so that we can understand, oh yeah, we just looked at this sonic object from every different angle. And that's really helpful as a listener.
I love to put like myself in extreme limitations, because I find myself, I'm way more creative that way. Because if I can just like pick anything, then it's just like, I don't know. So I place all these restrictions until I'm like in this like tiny little box, and then I see like how hard can I like bang on those walls. That's something I enjoy.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's what I love about folk music too. Can you write something interesting only using 3 chords? And with Tomas's piece, just because we listened to it, I'll say it like the theme of that piece is da 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 da. That's the main theme of the piece. And then he does all these interesting things around it. I love that. I love that with food. Can you take a simple ingredient and make it interesting? That to me is one of the most fascinating journeys with any piece.
Yeah.
I think that Shantin, do you want to chime in on something? Because what you are speaking about kind of reminds me of how Shantin speaks about music and about life, because he uses a lot of metaphor with with uh, with music and food, and his
Food.
music is right.
Oh,
Uh,
I would
your
I
music seems to be kind of like very focused. At least your I now I've known your pieces throughout the years. I think that your better pieces are the ones that kind of are more focused. Uh, so I kind of listen to echoes of what we've talked about over and over in Amanda's words here.
My theory is if we compose like making salad, then that's not very good because you know when you go to even if you are going to the so-called the best restaurants, usually salad is usually it's the cheapest, and you get like a mix of random fresh greens and maybe 2 or 3 like pieces of like chicken, whatever, breads, and then actually nobody in your party would really like enjoy and appreciate you. Wow, that salad is all amazing. But a lot of time when we write music, when things get a little bit abstract, then we forget what we get from the restaurant. We just write a lot of pieces that contain so many things. Then it's like we have a lot of greens, we have a lot of veggies, and then we are chewing carrots at this time, and then the moment later we get a lot of lettuce, and we don't know what to taste. Yeah, I'm very concerned when I have lots of ideas, but but you know, in I mean, for composers, I believe there is always a kind of urge that makes us feel like, oh, we want to impress or we want to write something that sounds strong, full, or rich in whatever way you want to describe it. And then we try to like, oh yeah, this is a killer moment of the piece. But however, it is getting harder and harder to digest sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, it can start to feel really busy and random. And actually, like food and music are kind of both time-based mediums. And like with food, the flavor develops over time. If there's too much happening, like what you're saying, Shuting, is that like it just feels random. If there's too much happening all at once, and like if you're gonna have, you know, a beautiful steak, or if you don't eat meat, then like some beautifully prepared pasta or something that where all the flavors kind of meld together. You really do still want kind of one flavor to be the main flavor somehow, if possible, to focus it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest. Like I've taught young composers, mostly teenage composers, for a long time now, and that's the hardest thing. Like that, I've had some ones that had really advanced like technique in terms of like counterpoint and harmonies and all sorts of things, but it's hard. It's like I feel like that's like the last thing that counts for most composers. I mean, I wasn't any better when I was a teenager either. But it was like if I put more things in all the time, it's going to sound better because it's, that was my brain thinking as a teenager. More is always better. More is more. And it's hard to learn. I mean, and I still see that a lot. Actually, what drives me nuts is I feel like I see that. I really like theatricalism in my music, and I see that so much more frequently, I feel like, in music that's theatrical. And then I feel like people don't really judge it partially because it's just like, oh, well, that's just theatrical. I'm like, okay, well, it could still be musical or refined. That always.
Yeah, it starts to feel like a gimmick.
Yeah.
When people rely on theater and being over the top as a way to kind of fill up the space and distract from what's happening sonically, or feeling like they need to compensate somehow by making things goofy and weird, that can be really unsatisfying, actually, as a performer. And I mean, you've seen me perform enough, Megan, that you know I'm willing to go there. And if that's the intention of the piece, I can totally be the birthday clown, goofy, wacky.
Yeah, I remember you doing the vacuum piece like a couple years ago, maybe. Yeah,
absolutely. But
it was
you know
beautiful
what?
and focused.
But see,
You cut out.
Yeah, you cut out somehow.
right.
There you go.
There you go.
No, I cannot listen to you for some reason. That's fine. Take your time.
Okay, is this okay?
Yeah.
Is this
Yeah.
okay?
Sure.
It might not be as good. My Bluetooth speaker just ran out. But okay, so Megan was talking about Carola Backholt's
Yes.
vacuum leader, vacuum song. And actually, that's a great example of a piece that does it super well, because there's a few techniques where I'm putting a vacuum on my face and playing with the timbre of what it sounds like when there's a vacuum sucking on your face. And it's so focused. It's so funny. It's all about motherhood and like the role of the woman in the family. And so it's actually kind of like stressful and in a lot of ways. And it's not trying to be over the top. The vacuum is absolutely a gimmick, but the way she uses it is not a gimmick. And that's the thing. It's not just me sort of flailing about randomly. It's very, very intentional, every little movement that I make. And so it really works. I want to do that piece again.
Yeah, no, it was a fun piece to watch in the audience member, and it was a very focused piece, I think, and very strong, even though it's obviously very unique to have a vacuum.
Yeah, and it was like hard to practice because it kind of hurt after a while. So that's something that, like, the theatrical things. Yeah, there's always kind of a price to pay with those things. Yeah,
I mean that one was really that one. Yeah, that one was such a strong piece, and I remember that whole concert actually was a very great, incredible concert. But I remember. I mean, when I went to Darmstadt, which was like 10 years ago now, there's so many more theatrical pieces that are performed there than in the States, which was kind of encouraging, except that almost all of them were just awful. Like, they were just all pure gimmicks. And it was so discouraging that, like, such a high percentage of them being presented were so bad, and people were not critical of them. Like, and if and Darmstadt's known to be a pretty harsh crowd, and any other kind of style of music would be presented and they would just rip it to shreds. And no one would talk critically about any of the theatrical music, and some of them being presented were just really terrible. Like, yeah, I don't know.
I think with the sort of like devised pieces or whatever we want to call that genre of theatrical new music, it's like so much of it is being devised and performed by instrumental musicians who have never trained in acting or theater. Yeah. And it seems like they don't believe that that's a real technique or craft, and that they could sort of step into it with zero training or understanding of dramatic pedagogy. And if they make it weird enough, It's an emperor's new clothes situation, and no one will criticize them. And to anyone who has studied theater or acting, so much of it is so disappointing and uninteresting and just bad. But I think a lot of the people watching it at Darmstadt, they might not have the language or the terminology. They might know it's not good and that it's not working, but they might not have the language to critique it properly in their own mind. And they don't want to just say, it was bad and I was bored.
Yeah, I mean, because just so many of them, they were just like everything under the kitchen sink in one song. There was like all these pieces, and they had to have like every medium. They had to have like lights, and they had to have videos, and they had to have electronics, and they had to have like, and it was everything going on at once. And it was, just all over the place.
Yeah, you just feel oversaturated.
Yeah.
What then? Megan just described what she will consider like gimmicky or effectist, I will say, if I had to invent a new word. But what would you consider to be gimmicky in new music, especially in chamber works, at least in the ones that you've been around?
I think the thing that
Or a cliche or overdone or effect is just effect for the sake of the effect, or what we've been talking about here. I think that it all goes into intentionality equals maturity, and also uh, economy of materials also shows kind of like that a composer or a work is kind of mature. So uh, what would you say that it goes against that, if we can call it aesthetic?
I think when people approach working with a vocalist for the first time, they often want to tell a good story or do something dramatic. And they think that doing the most extreme thing will be the most interesting thing, whether that's telling the darkest, most violent story, having the singer scream and cry and be in their most extreme high range and low range, just going so hard and telling this, just the darkest story, the most heartbreaking thing. And that can end up just looking ridiculous. And it's me that has to go out there and do that. So the composer wants to look extreme and edgy and cool, and I am the sacrifice that has to do that on their behalf. So, and it's very physically taxing, and I don't like singing about murder and death and assault and violence and sadness all the time either. I think it's way harder to tell sometimes a happy story or a funny story than to tell like a really sad, dark story. And I just noticed this with like all the new operas being written in the past 20 years. It's either a biography of a really famous person that they can market and sell, or it's like the most tragic thing that the composer could find on the internet. And now they want to dig up everyone's horrible stories to put it on stage. And so I just think that that's the thing, like trying to be extreme and edgy at the expense of the person who has to sing it. And it's really tiring.
That also has to do with authenticity, I will guess. It comes out as inauthentic, right? Would you say so? It's just how it sounds to me, like from your words.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to want to sink into that and really embody it all the time. Yeah, and I guess, it does feel kind of opportunistic or conniving in some way. I'm sure that that's not necessary. I'm sure that people sincerely are interested in the topics that they're writing about, I hope. But it does sometimes feel like a marketing tool.
Yeah. You can always tell the difference between like a piece of music where the composer is writing what they think they should be writing, rather than like a piece of music where the composer is being more genuinely expressive. despite whatever, whether it's the academia or certain audience members or whatever they think other people expects of them. Those pieces I feel like never end up being good when someone writes for expectations of others.
I think that applies to, gosh, universally, may I say, to various art forms, painting, poetry. If you're writing the poem that you think people want you to write, I don't think it's going to be as true to your voice and your vision as a creator. That's such a hard-earned lesson, I think, as a creator. Because first you have to figure out what you even like. And if you've been taught by these instructors your whole life, really valuable, wonderful things about craft and music and art, but you've just been receiving all of this information for so long, you do need to take the time to figure out what it is you're naturally, authentically drawn to.
Yeah. So I also want to talk about like how you've commissioned and worked with tons of different composers. So what's your interaction typically with the composers you work with, and how involved do you get?
I working with groups and ensembles, it's totally a group effort, and I do find I know it's really hard as a young composer to find these opportunities, but it often takes years of getting to know a person and just finding the right project where it feels like, oh, we're going to be working with this presenter and this composer would be perfect for that project. So a lot of it is based on, developing these relationships over time and then finding the right opportunity. But I'm very involved in the commission process and the conversations. I mean, with Quince, we are all involved in the conversation, working with the composer, having video sessions, sending text ideas back and forth. And, we have a voice sheet that talks about all of our ranges and the techniques that we use. And then after those initial conversations are done, we usually try to have an in-person workshop with the composers when we can, when it makes sense, because we all live in different places. So if we can't be in the same room with them, what we try to do is have like a rehearsal period of a day or 5 days, whatever it is. And then we'll send recordings of the rehearsals to the composer. We'll get feedback and do sort of a long distance thing. So we try to be really extremely collaborative in that situation when we invest in a piece. And then for Quince, we have a rule that we don't schedule the performance until after we receive the score. So, we usually take 6 months between getting the score and then premiering it at least. And we like to have several rehearsal sessions on each piece and really develop it that way so that there's more time to edit. That's the Quince rehearsal process, commission process. Daliente has got like 800 members, so it doesn't work like that. But we still have a lot of interaction with the composers.
Is there any guidance like you give people about your about either your voice specifically or just the voice like that you tell composers?
So much, but with Quince, we try to describe it like a string quartet, where you have one per part and the ranges are kind of in that. And it's not just about the range of the instrument, but the color of the instrument. So Carrie and I have really light soprano voices. We're the violins. Liz is the viola. Kaylee is the mezzo, and she has that, that richer, darker, lower sound. And so when we think about balance with Quince, we're thinking about it in that way, not like a large choir. And then I think one of the things that's really difficult to understand if you're not a singer is that the range and the tessitura are different things. Tessitura means sort of where the voice is most comfortably situated, sort of middle range of the voice where you want most of the piece to sit. And then the range is all the way up to the extreme high and the extreme low. But if I say that my highest public note is a high E or a high F or whatever, I don't want to do that for 10 minutes. I'm not a piccolo, And so that's something that I try to convey is like, yes, I can sing those notes, but you don't get the full range of color and volume on all of the notes. And the extreme notes are not comfortable for long stretches of time.
Mhm.
You spoke. It seems that obviously you're very big on storytelling. Well, there are some things that you talked about. First, did you ever kind of felt some pressure to undermine or leave behind your roots as a folk singer or something like that because of being trained in academia? That would be
Yeah, it was never super explicit,
yeah.
but it was just there was never really an opportunity in that world to really showcase that, except for in my undergrad, my choir teacher, Dr. Clayton Parr, he had an a cappella group, and we would do some American folk music, and we did Georgian folk music from the Republic of Georgia. And so that was one of the first times that folk music for me was acknowledged as this art form worthy of being studied and not just a thing you listen to with your grandma on the radio, you know. And then when I was at Buffalo, actually, Tony encouraged me to put Woody Guthrie songs on my master's recital. And so I did this master's recital that was like all John Cage and Woody Guthrie and like Jacqueline Fontaine. It was super weird. but she really encouraged me, you know, you love Woody Guthrie, why not put some of this on your recital? So there were little glimpses where that part of me was nurtured, but it took a long time. You know what it took for me to get back to songwriting was improvising. And whenever I would improvise with my friend Jesse Langen, who's a guitarist, it would come out as these folk songs. That's just how I would improvise, and I wasn't trying to. And sometimes it would come out as weird gurgles and screams and burps and whatever extended technique stupid thing I was doing. And then sometimes it would come out as like little folk songs about Persephone. And I realized like, oh, that's really fun. And am I allowed to do this? That's what would pop into my head. This is really fun. Am I allowed to do this? And then finally I stopped asking if I was allowed to do it, and I just did it.
Can you speak a bit more about songwriting and what do you look for in a narrative, in a story? Like, does it have to have a structure? How does it influence the way you sing? And I also wanted to kind of throw this into Sean Tim because he is also a writer. He's like out of us the only one that's re- not written lyrics, but you've written text, right, Sean Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, probably. But first, can you talk about your songwriting process and all of that? Because I appreciate popular music, folk music, because there's a lot of well, on one part you can focus on one element at a time of what you want to develop, especially using strophic form at times. And like, okay, you are developing the story now, but then if you are repeating the lyrics, you can focus on uh, part of the music and develop that and kind of, for a simple example, modulate the same music, then that's a big change within the same parameters or dimensions, or that it's about a slow build up. But yeah, how do you
Well, yeah, see, I see all these guitars behind you.
yeah.
So I do feel that there's probably a really strong connection to popular music in your life.
Kind of, yeah, a bit.
um,
I enjoy it, let's just say that.
yeah,
Put
I
it.
bet you, to put it mildly, I think. Um, yeah, I love the repetition of a real long lyric ballad. to me to sink into that, like Jillian Welch's song, I Dreamed a Highway. It's like a 10-minute song that barely changes, but each strophe has this a little thing that's different about it. And it's that minimalistic sort of sinking into these long stories and getting lost. I love that. And I have a really hard time with long form things. Everything that I write wants to be really short. So I admire people who can write long things, but I always start with text, pretty much. Sometimes a melody will come to me and I'll put it down in my phone. But really everything comes from the text for me. So what I'll do is I'll just free write these long, 5, 10, 20 page free write things about circling a narrative, circling an idea like darkness or, Essex or a river somewhere. And I'll just write down all of these free associations with that thing. And then I'll leave it. And then 5 years later, I'll find it and say, oh, yeah, I remember when I did that. And then I'll start to shape it and say, oh, this matches with this. This matches with this. Oh, I see a sort of scansion developing in this line. Maybe I can make it all fit into that scansion. So it starts with a chaotic word structure. And then I start to shape the words. And then I'll just free associate with a melody after that. Some things have started with, I would say that my most interesting songs harmonically have started without words. It's just really hard for me to become inspired that way. So it's rare. But that's how I work, is really words first, and then I shape it.
I wanted to, throw the ball now into Shantin. Shantin, what do you have to say about your writing process?
Usually I came up with some kind of silly ideas and then I try to develop it a little bit more. But when you talk about like songwriting, actually I have a very I have some experience of like writing songs because I have gigs at church and I wrote a little bit of like so-called contemporary Christian music. Usually I try to tell some kind of stories instead of like just repeating some kind of scriptures because I work for like Mandarin speaking churches and most of the time they prefer like the lyrics are actually the scriptures. So I myself prefer like telling a story, something like that. And yeah, I think it's very important to build a connection for the listeners, or at least for myself as a creator of such a song, that I want to like create some kind of like a connection between myself and the lyrics as well as the music that I try to write. And another thing that I would like to respond is when Amanda talks about like the repetition or trope, something like that. I remember a very brief things that I interned at a film music studio that I had to write a very short opening music for a feature movie, and then I asked the artistic director if I need to vary the themes a little bit, vary the melodies a little bit, something like that. And then he said, no, you don't need to do that. You are not writing like Mozart. Don't worry about that. Just repeat it, because actually it is more important for them to make it memorable. People can remember it, but somehow actually it's pretty hard. We may naively imagine that if it is short, if it is repetitive, people will remember it. But somehow, if it is too simple, people will, or the clients will complain that, oh, why do I need to pay you for that? It's too easy. It's too simple. So we will want to like create something that is like musically intriguing to the point that it is worth a little bit more repetition, but at the same time, the repetition is not going to sound too dumb, right? If you just let's say if you just want to repeat like very short 3 notes motif, do re mi, for like 100 times. People will remember it, of course. Nobody will going to forget it. Even by 5 years will remember it. Of course, if you keep on doing, but it is equally dumb to a certain extent, right? So we need to create
Mhm.
something. I think it's very hard, very challenging to create something that is like musically interesting, but at the same time, repetition is okay, or even function as a very powerful tool in the music. Yeah, I think it's really challenging. Yeah.
Now, simplicity is so difficult. And for me, my process in finding simplicity is to expand it to all the potentials and then whittle it back down to the things that I can't let go of. Like, okay, what are all the possible ways that I could spin this out? Just so that I have all the things in there. I have enough material to find something interesting. And then I start to pick away, well, that's maybe not, that doesn't stand out, that I could live without that. And then and then I come back down to the things that I can't live without in the piece. And it's usually mostly the thing that I started with a couple extra things that I found during that exploratory process. And it takes forever. It's so slow. It's such a slow process. It drives me crazy. I don't know how you composers do this all the time. This is just a side thing for me. If I was doing that all the time, I would go insane.
We
I
have
think a lot of composers are. Yeah, I think it probably are.
You're like, yeah, we have gone insane.
a couple of times. Well, I just wanted to ask you both this. I know you cannot stay for long, but yeah, what compels you to share a story? What would you say that? Because okay, I come from a literary background, and I've studied literature from an academic, intellectual point of view, and done my essays on analysis and all of that. But I haven't really. If I will try to write fiction, then it would be really hard for me because I wouldn't know what I would want to write, what would be meaningful for me, like to share with other people in terms of fiction, in terms of writing a story, a narrative. Like, how do you tackle that? I'm asking both Amanda and Shantin since they are the both the ones that we get here. But yeah,
Yeah,
Amanda,
Shinting, do you have an answer for that?
I have to scratch my head a little bit.
yeah, you
Yeah.
just do it,
I just write it. Yeah. You
right?
whatever in your head, and then just try to write it. I I I remember like 1 year ago when I told my friends about like writing like dystopian fiction, and then a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, being very honest to me that, oh, I believe that idea is pretty boring. But but actually I was a little bit surprised, because I felt like, hey, yeah, I had some kind of like awesome idea. I have to write, otherwise I won't succeed, or something like that. But yeah, but somehow I just write it. Yeah, I just write it. I think it's very important. I believe writing is about, I mean,
What do you want to communicate?
yeah, you have something to tell people. It's not about how people may perceive it. It is important, but at first, initially, what do we want to communicate? What do we want to express? What what do we like? I think that's what we want to show people when we are writing, let's say, fiction, or writing pieces or songs. I believe that's the way it works. Maybe I was to be honest, perhaps I was a little bit discouraged by my friends' very sincere comments, but to us, but actually he didn't really know the whole picture of my story. I just told him like, yeah, that was like it was a dystopian fiction about some kind of like crazy government, something like that. Yeah, and then somehow I'm still writing it, right? So I think that's very important for creative people to like to work against some kind of discouragement by other people or by yourself. Yeah.
You got to push through. If you have an initial spark with something, then yeah, you have to see it through to the end because you had that spark. So there must be something there.
You mentioned Persephone, for example, right?
Yeah, I think I have a different approach when I'm using other texts versus my own. So sometimes I'll find I love finding antique or vintage children's books and then using the weird public domain poetry in there because the language is kind of old and archaic and it makes me think about melody in a different way. But if I'm writing my own text, for me, it feels like an exorcism. Like it's something that I have to get out of me. And it's often like a lot of the songs that I write are about my grandmas. And, they lived very simple lives that no one will know or remember or care about but me, maybe, and our family. But I wanted to put them into something beautiful to honor them and celebrate them and to tell their stories because I think it's fascinating. And when I'm performing these songs, to me, it feels like a kind of witchcraft where I'm trying to conjure the experience of the song or the place or the person and then bring it back into the world. My grandmas are both gone, but I like to think that when I sing those songs, I'm conjuring them and bringing them into the space and sort of like releasing them from the hard things that they experienced or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's a little creepy.
No, I like the symbolic language you're using, but one has to be careful with possession, being possessed.
Yeah, true. No, that's true.
Is there we've talked a lot about your songs. Is there anywhere that any listener could go to listen your songs or purchase some of your albums?
Yeah, I have a Bandcamp page. Quince has a Bandcamp page, so does Hasco Duo. And so if you want the weird improvisation, that's Hasco. And then my songs are on my page, and then Don Liente has some stuff up as well. And don't worry, if you've come to my concerts, I have not put a spell over you or a curse. And for me, when I am singing contemporary music, though, and working with a composer, I do want to embody it as much as I embody my own songs, because I think that it's more interesting to watch performers who really believe in what they're performing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I will have
for sure. Yeah, I'm always really interested in I don't know, as a composer, like when I'm deep in the piece, I feel like I feel like a ownership of it. But then when I finish it, or even sometimes before I finish it, if I'm working with a performer in the piece while I'm writing, there's like a certain point that I kind of have to. I feel like the piece does better if I, give it away, and I want like that performer's personality and humanity and spirit to be embedded.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
piece.
I mean,
that is so interesting.
Anthony Green's performance of your piece in Omaha was mesmerizing, and it really did feel like you had given him a piece for him.
I tried.
to fully embody. I mean, it really felt like that. It felt like it emerged from him in a wonderful way. And so, I think you're very talented with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I see you perform, I definitely see your personality coming through the pieces, and I think that makes the performances definitely more interesting and compelling for sure.
It doesn't work for all music. I know that's not it's not tasteful sometimes, so I try to rein it in when necessary, of course.
Yeah. No, awesome. Pretty cool. Yeah, so we don't have to do too long. Is there any questions or closing words anyone has, or final thoughts?
Juan, what do you do with all those guitars?
I collect them. I play them whenever I have time. I just practice. It will be my main the one I've studied the most is classical guitar, but the one I play the most is electric guitar. Is what you said, the timbres that you can get out of them, and the music is just another experience. It's like
Oh yeah.
I gravitate between those two poles, contemporary music and classical music. I'm into the classical repertoire too, but yeah, there's something that I can get out of those guitars that I cannot get out of anything else. So it's just,
Hmm.
and
Oh yeah.
they're
That's
different
beautiful.
friendly. It's just it's for collecting, but it's also you attach kind of. They have their own personalities, kind of like
Hmm.
there are many layers. We can talk about it like in a more extensive way.
Yeah.
in, it's like each one has its own story, each one has its own
Mm.
personality, its own way of playing. It's like its own. It's like I don't know how to describe it right now. That's what I would say.
I'm trying to learn guitar, so I see all your guitars and I feel like intimidated. It's such a difficult instrument for me right now, but maybe someday it won't be, and I hope that I can like build that relationship with my instrument.
Is that
Hmm.
I've always said that the instrument chooses you, right? You don't
Mm.
choose the instrument. It's like I tried to learn piano as a kid. They put me in lessons for many years, and it's kind of like was an okay player. I didn't practice that much, but once I got a guitar, it kind of clicked right away, and I've stayed more or less playing ever since. And
Mm.
I don't know, there's an attraction. It's like an authentic attraction. What we were talking about authenticity earlier on, and
Hmm.
people can intuitively say when you're being inauthentic or when something is being phony. Like I think that the same can be said about musical instruments and your connection with them. And
Mm.
what you're doing, yeah, is like pretty interesting because what you learn when you're playing guitar is that there are many languages in the guitar. Like you can learn this style. It depends on the, of course, on the genres. It's a very wide world to explore. If you play good classical guitar, it doesn't mean that you play a good electric guitar, and
That is so true.
that's just kind of like on the top layer. You can go further and further into that. Uh, like for country music, there's finger picking, for example, right?
Oh,
You-
I know it's driving me nuts. I'm trying.
that's I cannot do that. I've never learned that, and it
Mm.
would be really, really, really challenging. And I know many
Hmm.
classical musicians that cannot do it, and that they have these silly wars between finger picking students and classical guitar students at the academies. I've learned this over the years. Just kind of silly. I don't know.
I know everyone's own thing is beautiful. So there's no reason to tear down someone else's thing, except for the
For
theater
sure.
people at Darmstadt. Just kidding.
No, I mean it's so great that they're programming so much theatrical music. I just wish
Mhm.
that more of it was good. Because I think it's totally possible to be really good at compelling. It was just that
Too real.
there was a couple pieces that were, but it was very much a minority. Uh, well,
Maybe by now they figured it out.
maybe by now, hopefully.
But were
But
they
yeah,
younger composers or
um,
you
I
remember?
mean, not they were. I mean, I was younger then, and they were probably my age then 10 years ago. You know, and, I mean, there were a lot of more established composers too, and some of them some of them wrote better pieces and some of them did not. So,
I think
yeah.
that my approach to composition may run the danger of falling into that in a way, because how you see your own compositions, you see them as extensions of yourself, right? I, on the other hand, see them as objects. I am an architect and I am building this object. And once I'm done with it, it's like goodbye. It goes out into the world. I'm going to the next thing. So you can say that in many ways it's kind of artificial and uh, an artifice or something like that. Whereas if you think of it more of an extension of yourself, I think that you run less into that danger of falling into those cliches, into those traps that we've or gimmicks that we've talked about. And because authenticity is, then again, going back to that theme, it's like something that you cannot fake. We humans can tell. It's something that
Sure.
whenever somebody approaches you to sell you a scam or try to whatever, you can tell.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like an intuitive thing. Well, you haven't been corrupted enough by the world and be being absorbed as an artificial object yourself, let's say. If you still have a soul nowadays,
Right.
symbolically speaking, what I wanted to ask you is like, you kind of, I don't know if you have time. Do you have time or
Sure.
sure? Um, about extended vocal techniques, because I I know about using consonants. I know about like stuff like that, but I will say that something that you mentioned with the vacuum cleaner is it could be an extended technique. If there and the work you do with kins, how do you pronounce it? Quince?
We say quince.
Queens? Okay. It's a word, 15 in Spanish.
I know. When we came to Mexico, they asked where the other 11 of us were. There's also a fruit called quince.
Okay. Because of your work in Queens, and now I'm saying it. Oh, in Queens, and your work in Del Niente, I will guess that you've worked with a lot of extended techniques, and that's something that okay, it can become a gimmick, but we composers are always looking for ways of extending our vocabulary. And what would you say that will be at the forefront of those that are practical, that don't damage the voice and stuff like that? This is more technical stuff, like
Mhm. I love extended techniques. And I don't think extended techniques as themselves are necessarily gimmicks. I wrote my dissertation on inward singing on the inhalation. So I love exploring technique with the voice. And yeah, consonants are definitely a great way to get started. Just breaking apart words into the different component sounds of the word. That's a great way to start using the voice in a non-classical way or a new way. But also using timbre, um, making bright sounds or dark sounds, changing the vowel, using overtones. Um, and for anyone who sings contemporary music, they're usually willing to use vocal fry or maybe a little bit of the sort of gritty sounds, maybe not all of them. And that's not everyone, but certainly in Quince, we do vocal fry and whispers. Those are great ways to get started. And then some of the more challenging extended techniques would be things like singing on the inhalation, vocal percussion that's really rhythmic can be difficult sometimes. Certain kinds of like tongue pops and clicks. Actually, overtones can be difficult for people. Liz Purse is one of the members of Quince, and she is amazing at overtones. Oh my gosh, she can tune the fifth, the seventh, she's incredible. Whistling is something people like to use, but not everyone whistles. So and it's just a way to build new colors into the repertoire. I love it. I think it's so fun. To me, it becomes a gimmick when um, when you're doing it to look, like I said earlier, extreme or make the singer look crazy. I think sometimes people think the Barrio Sequenza can be gimmicky because it's kind of like, I actually do like that piece, but I think some people think it's gimmicky because it's like making the woman look crazy. And so that can be something that can maybe seem silly or inauthentic to people.
Hmm. This section I'm gonna transcribe over and kind of like uh, probably use it on a future composition if I ever work with voice again. I hope that I get that piece performed by the end of the month. By the way, just
Which
just
piece?
a piece for a lead, a piece that I wrote. I've been working on for the last 3 4 years with a living poet, and it's kind of like it's been hard to find a singer, and I think that it's finally getting performed. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but I use only of what you mentioned, consonant singing, because I think the text kind of demanded it, and like how the music. But now that I think I should listen to Queens more. Definitely. I'm gonna go. I see that you have three
Hmm.
uh, three albums, or what are these? Madrigales
So
Trio.
one of our albums is out on Innova, and that's Love Fail by David Lang. One of them is out on New Focus Recordings. And so those two don't appear on our Bandcamp page because they're on the other label's Bandcamp page.
Okay, let
But
me
yeah,
hear that.
so for extended techniques, I would say that Hushers is a good place to start.
Oh, okay. It's
Oh,
here. I'm just sharing the Bandcamp.
oh yeah, that's our Bandcamp. So if you look for our Hushers album, that has a lot of extended techniques.
Okay.
And then we have another album coming out in July, which is like contemporary experimental music mixed with folk music because we're kind of blending it together. And
On
so,
new focus recordings, then
yeah,
I
so
see
that'll have some of
them.
our music on it too.
It's this one.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, sweet. I'm gonna. I'll surely grab them. Damn, damn. It's been very illuminating. Now, I don't know if I'll work with voice again. I'm kind of discovering it's really hard. It's really hard. It's kind of like, but
Mm-hmm.
then again, you learn a lot of stuff. I don't know, Chunting, have you worked with boys before?
I had an old piece for mezzo soprano and chamber orchestra. And yeah, and I also wrote a mezzo soprano again for and the piano. Yeah, I think I did it like 2 years ago. Yeah, in it was a project given by the Hong Kong Composers Guild. Yeah, so yeah, and of course I wrote something for voice and piano in my more formative years of training in back in Hong Kong. Yeah.
Would you write one now?
If I have such a chance, of course, yeah.
If Amanda, if you will you were to give Chunting or me some advice before going in and writing something that we are not that familiar with because we are not singers and we haven't really written that much for boys, or even Megan. I don't know if Megan is interested in working with boys.
Yeah, I'm interested in people. Yeah,
What
I
would you
have
say?
one piece with a voice in it. Um, well, one piece of the voice where you could hear the voice. I have a piece one piece that I wrote for Passy-Jet, which include Carrie Shaw, who's another member of Quince. It's not a texted vocal piece, but yeah, it's with guitar and piano and soprano. But yeah,
Oh, what would you say to us up front? Like you, you've already talked about tessitura versus range. We shouldn't. Yeah, it's like something that would seem basic for most singers to say to composers, but there's a lot of errors that uh, new composers to vocal music do with that that don't do that distinction between tessitura and range, for example, and they always write on the higher register or on the lower register. That kind of fatigues your voice, right?
Well, I would say that, yeah, staying in the extreme high and extreme low for a long time can be tiring. It's hard to write for voice without knowing which voice you're writing for, but
Okay.
it's not impossible, of course. And I think that one of the things to note is that singers like to move around. We like our voices to flow and go into different registers. We don't want to just sing one note for a long time. Usually that can be kind of tiring for singers.
Have you received
Um,
that in some recordings lately? A lot of that,
mhm.
like,
There's been some, and it's like in minimalistic pieces or pieces that really want to be kind of static
uh huh.
and, or Feldman, something like that. That can definitely happen. And I would say the other thing, if you're going to use text, to just pay attention to the strong and weak syllables. It's a lot easier to sing if the strong syllables of the word are in the strong beats of the music. It really makes our brain hurt if there's a strong beat on a weak syllable, or if you do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yep.
That just and it's something to just always pay attention to. But if you're not using words, then it doesn't matter.
I don't. Well, of course, you want the voice to be like, well, at least for me, you want that aspect of the voice, that timbral aspect, to merge with the instruments and stuff like that. But you also have this other aspect that de facto is more important. That are and those are the lyrics and how the music, how you set the text to that. But yeah, I will say that I will first go to the text and see what it's trying to say, and then it's kind of like take it from there, see the what music comes out of the text. The text should, when you're writing vocal music, I think that the priorities kind of change. Do you see that
Mhm.
a lot of will you say that some composers kind of disregard that in terms of
I think it's fine to want to do something different and to push against the soprano or the singer as the soloist. I think that can be really interesting. Um, and it's fun to be,
you can
one of the
is that you can try and do that, but it will never be that way once you only by having a singer there, visually speaking. The singer's gonna get all of the attraction.
I think it's easier with Quince because we're all singers. So it's
Mhm.
almost easier to treat the voice like an instrument in the context of a vocal chamber group.
You can kind
So
of, I will say that you can kind of create some tension by not using the singer in a certain manner, or let's say a very classical example, the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, where you got the choir there for 30-40 minutes, but once the singers enter the scene, it's like they will always take the full attention of the audience. It's something that is
yeah, it's
kind
sort of like a
of,
like Irish bagpipes or something. Once they're in the room, that's what you're paying
Mhm.
attention to. I
it's
have to go I have to go help with bedtime.
it's so
Thank you for your for coming
I'm
out.
sorry to cut off this
Second
great
half. Oh no, no.
conversation.
Thank you for your
Thanks
time.
for your sharing. Thanks for your time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This was really fun.
Yeah.
yeah, it was great having you.
I really want to hear all of those guitars now. I'm very curious.
No, I will. Okay, we'll stay in touch. And I
Okay,
will.
good.
Cool. Well, be safe.
All
Have a good
right.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
night.
Night.